Information and truth. In this set of lectures, I would like to take up the ideas of semiotics and include the concept of truth to understand truthful information and misinformation. Later, we're going to be talking about information modalities and language statements, as well as evaluating the truth of information more specifically, and addressing issues such as cognitive biases, the scientific experiment, and tools for skeptical thinking. Semiotics and the truth of information. Before we go on to the semiotics and how truth relates and can be explained via the semiotics framework, let's take up the definition of information again. And we have two. One is the general definition of information. And in this case, I need to emphasize that there's really three different things going on that people refer to as information. Sometimes they refer to information as the signs or the symbols very broadly. So images, pictures, letters that represent or refer to something else in the world. That's one way people refer to information. Another as the concept or interpretation of something in the world, or the signs or symbols of something in the world, right? Which are sort of two different things here. And then also the relationship between the sign or symbol to the concept or interpretation, or to the other something in the world. And when I refer to something in the world, I usually also use these three things here: thing, event, or process, because I think that encompasses everything. And of course, I will also refer to this as just phenomena, just something that exists. So often information is defined as just purely two words, semantic content. And we got this from Validity, and he writes that information equals data plus meaning. Data in that general sense of anything given, so just something at some phenomenon, so anything, any mark on the paper, any pattern, plus the meaning. But what is meaning? It's funny because it doesn't go into the meaning of meaning. And meaning is a reference. Meaning is a relation. Meaning is a connection. And I think people kind of always miss that. People think of just the sign or the symbol as the information, but really information is about the relationship between the sign or the symbol. So it's kind of all of these three things here going on: the relationship between the sign or the symbol and the concept, or the sign or the symbol and the thing in the world, the object, and so on. So news articles, fiction books, stupid social media posts, formal data quality reports, spoken words, songs, mathematical symbols and equations. These are all references to concepts or references to external objects, events, or processes in the world, so other phenomena. That's what meaning is. And that's why these things here are all, we call this information. Let's be reminded of the also special view of information, the more specific definition of information, which is true information or true semantic content. And sometimes people do use the term information, for example, information as opposed to misinformation. So the idea is that information is sort of true or true-ish, and misinformation is non-true. So information is correct representation or valid representation or valid reference or valid correspondence to something else in the world. So some very clear examples: the earth is a sphere and the sun is magnetic. This is information. If somebody says that, they're giving you information. If somebody says to you, the earth is flat and nobody knows what the sun is, this is not information. Okay. Now, if somebody says this, once again, it depends on the view. The general view, you can say, oh, this is all information, it's all, it's semantic. This is semantic. So we can say this is information, but it's not true information. And Validity does kind of argue that, like, we cannot think of information and misinformation as the same, although people do use the terms like this. If you use information in this general sense, just as the signs or symbols or just the concepts, then information and misinformation is the same. So he argues that we should refer and stick to information just as true information. Now let's bring back the idea of the framework of semiotics, which is the study of signs, and we can use semiotics to understand information and truth. And we've already gone over this before, so I won't go over too much, but let's do a review here. So the idea is that when we're dealing with symbols and language and images and thoughts and objects in the world, we have this semiotic triangle. We'll have maybe a set of letters. Maybe it's emphasized with a particular color or with an exclamation point, like this one here. And we can call this a symbol or a signifier or a sign. And it's a symbol or a signifier or a sign because it signifies or refers to something else. It stands for something, it may stand for something in the real world, some external object, event, or process, or it may stand or signify some concept or thought or interpretation. And I use the funny example here. So somebody says crisis, and then you think that means, oh, my computer is broken, or the computer in the libraries or the office is broken. But what they actually meant is, no, the whole town, the whole office is inundated with water. So we have three elements: the symbol, the thought, and the referent. And I use these terms interchangeably. So if I say symbol, I mean signifier or sign. If I say thought, I mean signified concept or interpretation. If I say referent, I mean the external object, event, or process. And these relationships here, I use the term signifies and refers to and stands for, but I can kind of mix them up a little bit sometimes. So correspond, represents, reflects, associates with, and so on. Notice that this one here is broken. This line is broken and different than the other two because the symbol stands for some external object in the world, but it usually, if not always, has to go through some thought or mental representation, some people call this mental model. So usually you don't just have a symbol and then the symbol directly refers to an object. People will have to have an interpretation of it in between. So here, let's take a definition of truth to explore how truth works within the semiotic triangle. And I'm going to propose a definition of truth as accurate, valid, or correct relation between the symbol and the thought, or the symbol and the referent, or the thought and the referent. And I'm using these terms here because they are similar and they all address this notion of truth. So if you go to the dictionary, you see accuracy is true, correct, or exact. So accuracy has a little bit more relationship with exactness, but correct is also true or accurate. So they kind of all refer to each other. Right has a almost kind of like a moral sense. So I'm not really sure if we want to use that term. Valid has definitions of sound and well-founded or having force. Valid probably comes from, value. So that starts getting a little bit more ambiguous. Also, the word just, isn't this a kind of also moral term? We're not going to get too deep into it, so I just wanted to propose these words for now, for just to help understand this notion of truth and true. There is also more specific, for example, definitions of truth. So logical validity. So that those are logical validity. Logical validity is so constructed that if the premises are jointly asserted, the conclusion cannot be denied without contradiction. So it's the lack of contradiction between premises, logical contradiction. I'm not going to get too deep into this, but I hope these terms work for now for us. So a definition of true information as essentially valid relations, these valid relations between these three elements of symbols and thoughts and real objects in the world. So truth can be a valid relation between the symbol or signifier and the reference. Another term here, thought, reference. I'm not really using this one, kind of more use the thought or concept. So if you see, this is a symbol, there's an image that you saw in the advertisement, or maybe you just read the title, McDonald's combo meal. If if this image has a concept of great meal, and this is a valid relation, an accurate, true relation, then we say that this is a valid relation. So meaning the relation can be between, the point that I'm trying to make is that the truthfulness can be between the symbol and the thought. And also the truthfulness can be between the symbol and the referent or the object out there. So this is the ad, and when you actually get the actual meal, when you go to the McDonald's and get served, it looks exactly like that. So it really is valid or accurate representation. Also relation, I'm not really enamored or married to some of these terms, so no, we can use representation instead of relation and so on, even connection, things like that. And then of course on the other side here too, so it can be the thought, the great meal, relates, can be a valid relationship with the actual object that you actually get, the actual thing, the actual food that you get when you order it. So the idea is that there's the truthfulness or validity can be here, can be here, and can be here. And also we need to highlight that truth and relations of truthfulness are always a matter of a degree. So we have to talk about truth as degree of valid relation, because when we think of something, let's say an image of a McDonald's meal, McDonald's combo meal, and the concept great meal, there can be shades of exactness or accuracy. So it is kind of a great meal, it's like 80, it's good maybe for your taste, but not really good for your stomach. So it's kind of like 80% great, and so on. And also the same applies to the other elements as well. The point here is to emphasize that it's a matter of a degree. It's not just yes or no. It's not binary, right? It's not a binary usually. And we'll kind of bring up that point again. By these definitions, we can then determine that a lack of truth is a lack of the valid correspondence, or even lack of sounds kind of binary. We can even say maybe low degree, right? Or not sufficient, low degree of correspondence. So if you, let's say you get a meal, you're thinking of McDonald's combo meal as a great meal, but then you get the actual served this thing here, and then you say, oh, my concept doesn't match, doesn't have a correspondence to the thing that I actually got, the actual object that I got. I thought it was a great meal, but this doesn't match, because this is not a great meal. This is a crappy meal. It's soggy, it's old, distasteful. And of course that this lack of validity or lack of truthfulness, lack of correspondence can happen in one of these three relations. And also let's know there's asymmetry in the relations. So for example, you can see the ad for the meal, and you can know that, oh yeah, I understand McDonald's combo meal. That's always great. It's great for my taste. I love that taste. Those are great meals. So when you see the ad and the great meal does correspond, that makes sense. It's a check. But when you actually go to it and you actually get it, you notice that the actual object that you got is not great. So the concept doesn't correspond to the actual object that you got, although the concept did correspond well with the symbol. You thought you were getting this, and you thought that's what you usually get, but and that is great meal, and this image refers to a great meal, but the actual thing itself doesn't. So there is this kind of asymmetry in the relationships. Here now, I wanted to bring the concept of reliability to our definition of truthfulness. And that's because other people have proposed it as a better way to think about truth, because truth is very philosophical, it's very broad and maybe contentious. So reliability, it might be a better term, so we can also use this term. And the reliability as the degree, so truth in the sense would be the degree to which a symbol corresponds to a concept or to the object or the concept and the object and so on, those three relations in a certain frequency. So the reliability has this notion of frequency embedded into it, which is interesting because it can be temporal. So, if you always go to McDonald's, you always get that great hamburger. So those relations can be consistent and reliable, but also can be spatial. So for example, if you're getting in one store, in your own hometown, well, this is supposed to be a building, is good. But when you go into another country, you go to, I don't know, Europe or Africa or whatever, and you get the McDonald's there and you're like, oh, the McDonald's is not good. So it's not reliable across space, but it could be reliable across, within a particular space. So within space and within time or not. So here we can, just to highlight the definition. So, we can have reliability here. So this is reliable maybe, but this here is not reliable. So definition of untruthfulness or lack of validity, maybe better saying lack of reliable relation between a thought and an object means lack of reliability or lack of truthfulness or lack of validity, right? You usually get a good meal from McDonald's, and this is why you associate a great meal with this image here, and that makes sense. But now all of a sudden you start getting this crappy actual hamburger. So the concept that you have is not reliable representation of the actual object. Also, we need to emphasize that things are usually not this simple, and there's always a need for a kind of a meaning extension, or I like to maybe also refer meaning specificity. You got to be specific. So for example, when you say, let's just read here, each symbol or concept may need to be expanded and further explored for the meanings and relations to be understood and assessed. So if you see the image, McDonald's combo meal in the newspaper or the advertisement, and then you think of great meal and you're maybe not sure, is the matches or doesn't match? A great meal to whom? To me, that's a great meal, but maybe it's not a great meal to my 2-year-old child. Is it great for how long? Maybe it's great in the first 10 minutes, but in the next hour, it's not going to be great for you. Some people like it in the first 10 minutes, but not in the second 30 minutes. Also great to our part of the body. It can be great to your mouth, to your taste palates, but it could be awful for your stomach. So there's always this need, or often this need, for meaning extension or meaning specificity to understand if this is a truthful or reliable relation or not. Other issues here, so we're kind of sticking with this notion of reliability and validity, but there are other potential definitions of truth. So you can say that the correspondence should be proper or conformable or appropriate or congruent. Some people even use a good, although this kind of has a reference to maybe a more kind of a value judgments, or sentiments, or moral, useful, and so on and so on. So we're sticking with the reliability and validity. I think is a good one, maybe accuracy, because they're more a formal and a verifiable. It can be assessed, when you compare, does this here, does it stand for, does it actually look like this? How accurate or how exact are both of those things you are referring to?